Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're very thankful that you take time from your busy day to join us. Today, folks, we've been promising a show on the media in the United States and particularly the world. And I thought we'd go about this in two ways. One, to give you a real short perspective and history of how the media got consolidated here in the United States and who was behind that consolidation. And the other way we want to get into this a little bit is to give you some quotes from the players on both sides of the hall with regards to the active members of the press and also some of the people that organized this consolidation. And then we want to take a look at, hopefully for about half the show, I'm going to get out some print newspapers that, in fact, I receive on a daily basis. And I want you to compare, as you're listening to these articles, I want you to compare the news that you're hearing, say, in the mainstream media as compared to the media that is not controlled by these conglomerates, these corporations. And I want you to look at the information presented by both, and then take a perspective of the events of the day that we're speaking of and see which entity is being more truthful and bringing you more knowledge and facts about the particular incident we're talking about. And of course, folks, you have to ask yourself, why is it that every single day of the year, 24/7, 365, the news in this country, whether it's the radio, whether it's the television, whether it's the print, is the same. It's always the same stories, it's always the same events, and the only thing they do is divide it into propaganda left or right. You know, they play with the language for their prospective audience, whether that's a liberal left-leaning audience or a right conservative leading audience. Again, all part of that divide paradigm that we speak of quite often on this show. But you have to ask yourself, why is it? How is it? What are the mechanisms that make that happen every single day? And not only that, folks, but who is controlling these mechanisms? Okay? So, first, let's ask ourselves, were there ever the media in this country, was there ever any truly independent media? Obviously, the facts are facts with regards to the sheer number of newspapers that used to be in this country. Folks, when they took over in the 20s, and we're going to get into this verbatim, but in the 20s, when they took over they tried to take over the media in this country, and they were successful. They did it by harvesting, if you would, collecting the top figures in newspaper prisons. At that time, the leading media in this country was in print, okay? Radio wasn't quite, it was there, but didn't have the big marketing yet. So a lot of the big control factors were in print, and what they wound up doing, instead of buying major amounts, hundreds of newspaper prints, what they did was they consolidated their efforts on the top 12 to 24 in the country. And the thousands of little local newspapers, after a while, actually couldn't compete with these big corporations. And so the more of these small hometown newspapers that either went out of business or their circulation was so little they were barely surviving and didn't have a lot of influence on the political spectrum of our country, basically became almost dormant in a sense that they no longer had effect. You know, a lot of them were still in business. They were hanging on by the skin of their teeth. But a lot of the political swaying left or right, or which road they ever wanted to take us down to, was being done by the major corporations. So how did they go about doing this? Let's get, and this is going to be real quick and layman, because like I said, I do want to spend half the show going over some other print you may find interesting. Okay, this is from basically the Representative Callaway from Texas, and this is in February of 1917. They really didn't become successful with this, folks, until about 1924, and by 1928, they really had a stronghold, if you would, of all the mainstream print here in the United States. And also there was people who were associated with the people in America that were organizing this in Europe doing the same thing. Okay? So again, February 9th, 1917, Representative Callaway took the Congress floor, he was from Texas, and provided, this is a report to the Speaker, if you would, and this is his report. He says, in March of 1915, the J.P. Morgan interest, the steel, shipbuilding, and powder interests, and their subsidiary organizations got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States and sufficient number of them to control generally the policy of the daily press. They found it was only necessary to purchase the control of the 25 of the greatest papers. An agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit the information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interest of the purchasers. Quite a statement. And this is from the Congressional Record. Again, Representative Callaway from Texas, February 9th, 1917. Okay, now let's break this statement down. First of all, we're looking back in March of 1915, basically 95 years ago. So where do you think they've gone, folks, in the 95-year spectrum of time with all this control, and as their authority expands, as their purse books expand, as their power expands, how much of the media do you think is controlled right now by them? Okay, so we're going back 95 years. The J.P. Morgan interest. Okay, the steel, shipbuilding, and powder interest. Now, folks, think about this. Steel, shipbuilding, and powder. What's the greatest mechanism of profit of these three industries? War. Okay? But J.P. Morgan also, folks, at this time was just in his early stages of the relationship that we've spoken about on the show before with a powerful banking family called the Rothschilds out of England, okay? But and their subsidiary organizations got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world. Again, they consolidated this down. They took the top people that are in this industry and basically they became more puppets for the puppet masters, is basically what happened, okay? So they take these 12 men in the newspaper world, again, because the print is the upper share of the marketing of information in this country at the time, and employ them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States and sufficient number of them to control generally the policy of the daily press. So in other words, instead of having to purchase and spend the money and manage the thousands of independent newspapers that were in this country at the time, they focused at the top. And they just took the tip of the iceberg, if you would, to control everything that was below it. And how'd they do this? They found it only necessary to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest papers, and an agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit the information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policy, and other things of national and international nature considered to be vital to the interest of the purchasers. So basically, folks, they're going to control what road they want to take you down, how they want you thinking, but more importantly, folks, they're going to control all the information that you are presented and gathering to yourself to analyze. Okay? So not only are they conditioning you with regards to language and how they're going to present it to you, but they are literally controlling the information that you are presented with to make a decision on whether yay or nay with this particular issue, whatever it may be. And this is why, folks, when in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act, think about it, how many people in this country, up to a very short few years ago, understood that the Federal Reserve was a private foreign bank, a private foreign corporation? operating for the interest of profit? Not many. I'll bet you if you went 5 years ago and you looked at the percentages, I would reckon to say about 3 to 6% of the entire population of the United States at that point understood it. Now I'm reading polls of 40 and 50%. Phenomenal. And some of that is because the powers to be have not controlled the internet yet. But they're on their way to that, as we've spoken to before on this show with Internet 2. But let's not digress too much. So some of the steel interests with Charles Mellon, New Haven Railroad, testified before Congress that his Morgan-owned railroad had more than 1,000 New England newspapers on his payroll at one time, costing about $400,000 annually. The railroad also held $500,000 in bonds issued by the Boston Herald. So, and then a Morgan trustee exercises media control of advertising. This is in 1937. Lunenburg says, this is the gentleman representing this company, that most advertising is controlled by the J.P. Morgan Junta, J-U-N-T-A, and a junta is a word for a cartel. Let's read that again. More advertising is controlled by the J.P. Morgan Junta than any single financial group, a factor which immediately gives the banking house the respective attention of the alert independent publishers. So in other words, how do newspapers make their money? Yes, they make some money by circulation, but you ask any newspaper person, they will tell you they make the majority of their money through advertisement revenue. Okay? So not only are they controlling the tip of the iceberg with regards to the media in this country, and at one time, if you look at this statement, there was over 1,000 small newspapers in New England alone. That's only 6 states out of the country. Think of this perspective of the country. All right? Ask yourself how many there are now. But so they not only control the tip of the knowledge, or the tip of the iceberg of knowledge, but because they want to squeeze out these smaller newspapers, they go out of their way to do what? More advertising is controlled by the J.P. Morgan Junta than any other single financial group, a factor which immediately gives the banking house the respectful attention of all alert, independent publishers. In other words, if you don't play ball with us, you're not going to sit at the table of dole-outs when it comes to advertising. So if we can't control you ineffectually on your editor's desk, we're going to control your thinking by controlling the purse strings that are made available to you. And the ones that didn't play ball are the ones that no longer in business, pretty much. And there are some independent newspapers that we're going to get into here. We cannot come across to you as we're trying to promote a particular newspaper, but why we're doing this is because we want to demonstrate to you that the difference in the mainstream controlled media as compared to the truly American independent newspapers. And I think you're going to be very surprised to discover who's behind some of the independent newspapers with regards to their former positions and what they couldn't allow. They couldn't look at themselves in the mirror anymore and say, I'm basically going to be a prostitute for the corporations. And I use that word because I'm going to read a statement to you from a gentleman at his retirement party. He was a former high echelon newspaper industrialist, and basically he used that word, that they're morally bankrupt and they are basically prostitutes. But we'll get into that quote in a little bit. So you got to understand, folks, that this was their problem of control of the media, and this is how they went about it. They basically purchased, if you would, the 12 highest men in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States. And then they provided the editors, they furnished the editors that would control the information being deciphered from that particular newspaper and going out. All right? So think of the control here. I mean, that's incredible. If you control all of that, the only other thing you have to control to influence the entire thinking of the American people is the education system. And we all know where the education system is in this country. Okay. This article continues that Morgan's control over the media at that time is well documented, but he was by no means alone in this. During the 1912 hearings held by Senate Privileges and Elections Committee, it was revealed that Representative Joseph Sibley from Pennsylvania was acting as a funnel for Rockefeller money to various corporative congressmen. Boy, here's a shock, huh, folks? You never heard this before, a congressman getting paid off? Wow. This is in 1912. Where are they in 2010? Okay, a letter was introduced to the committee written by Sibley in 1905 to John D. Archibald, the man of Rockefeller Standard Oil Company. Folks, Standard Oil Company is known as Saucony, Standard Oil Company of New York. They owned, Standard Oil Company was actually the company, that, and we can get into this, we've got into this with how we finance war and all, but if you, Standard Oil Company, if you want to look into a company that has been there from the inception of the corporatism in this country, there's a good place to start. Okay, the man at Rockefeller Standard Oil Company who provided the money, in that letter Sibley state, an efficient literary bureau is needed, not for a day or a crisis, but a permanent control of the Associated Press and kindred avenues. It will cost money, but it will be the cheapest in the end. So far as can be learned, the Rockefellers have given up their old policy of owning all newspapers and magazines outright, relying now upon the publications of all camps relying now upon the publications of all camps to serve their best interest in return for the vast volume of petroleum and allied advertising under Rockefeller control. After the J.P. Morgan block, the Rockefellers have the most advertising of any group to dispose of. When advertising alone is not sufficient to ensure the fealty of a newspaper, the Rockefeller companies have been known to make direct payments in return for a friendly editorial attitude. Now, you think about the things that the Rockefellers have been involved with, the financing of wars, and they profit greatly off of war. As we've gotten into before, folks, the bankers desire war because they finance both ends of the war, making both entities go into debt to them. And they swallow up all the positive assets of that nation. And this is the reason, one of the reasons why we actually we labor and judge our lives on a piece of paper that is actually an instrument of debt. All right? So the Rockefellers and the Morgans, of course, these are two entities looking out for the well-being of our nation. And so they basically, between the two of them, control, at this point, in 1917, but like again, in 1924 was when they really put it all together. At that time, the mainstream media, which was mostly in print. So if you continue with that, they get into these articles about how they arranged the Lusitania to be sunk, to bring us into World War I, how they went forward with the sinking of the battleship Maine in Havana to bring us into the first war of American imperialism, which was the Spanish-American War of 1898. Folks, they also, you go right along with it. They brought us, you know, they fed the bankers with the propaganda, with the Roaring Twenties. They kept the mechanisms of our money industry when it was changing from the hands of a country that was controlling their own money system through an appointed selection through Congress to a money system controlled by the private foreign bank, as you know, as the Federal Reserve System. When they finally collapsed the system in 1933, by that time they had so much control of the print in this country that the real reasons for the Great Depression were not foretold to the American people. And hence what happened from there, the American people, ignorantly, not being informed, gave up all of their gold and silver, free will, free hand, to a private foreign bank known as the Federal Reserve. And they have worked for a debt instrument ever since that time. It's just amazing what the control of information really is all about. Because if you think of that they now control the information that you analyze situations by. Again, they swing it one way or another to appease their market, the left or the right, doesn't matter. But it's taking you, the road is wider left or right, but that road is still taking us down to a one-way direction to a New World Order. And I know we got into some quotes in the New World Order, and I think they can't be any more question whether there is a group of people looking out to manufacture not only history, but to manufacture a new world government. They speak highly to themselves, braggingly to themselves, how they control the aspects of history now. And which brings me to one of my famous quotes in history that I really enjoy by Napoleon Bonaparte is that all history is agreed upon lies by the victors. I think that really sums it up, and particularly with today's media. Folks, look at Vietnam. We presented on this show how the Gulf of Tonkin never happened. The USS Maddox was never attacked. And what happened? We wound up having a 16-year war on a propaganda. Okay, Bob McNamara came out, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, before he died last year, saying it didn't happen. Basically, it was a mistake. Well, he called it a mistake. I think it was something that was done on purpose to bring us into Southeast Asia. Okay, and who profited greatly from that war? Did the American people? No, they went into debt, and it was a very tumultuous time in our history. It divided the American people. Did the people of Vietnam? No. 3 million dead and their country destroyed. So who benefited from that war? Was it the 58,000 dead GIs? Absolutely not. Was it the hundreds of thousands of veterans who came back carrying psychological baggage from that war and things that they probably never heal from? No. Who profited from that war? The bankers. Who's profiting from the wars today? The bankers. Okay, so we have mentioned Mr. Rockefeller on numerous occasions, and we've shown to you that he and his interest were one of the major entities in consolidating the media in this country. And we've demonstrated to you through the congressional record and other statements that this was going on as far back as 1915. So I just want to get into a quote from Mr. Rockefeller. And this is in June of 1991. Excuse me. June of 1991, and basically this is at a meeting of the Trilateral Commission. Now, we have gotten into the Trilateral Commission, but if you have not seen that show, basically if you look at the top of the pyramid, you got the Bilderberg Group, who take their marching orders directly from the puppet masters, and then you've got the Trilateralist Commission, which is an offshoot of the CFR, which is the Council on Foreign Relations, which controls the international relationships of the corporates, okay? And then you got the CFR, which was formed in the 20s, as we've gotten into, which is based at the Pratt House in New York. And basically, they are controlling all of the mechanisms of government and the media and education here in the United States. This is where these policies, you know them as think tanks, okay? That's the nice political word for them. But that's where all these policies are invented and devised, and the language is put down and presented to the State Department and other departments of the government for them to carry out. Hillary Clinton spoke about this just recently, about 3 weeks ago. She said that it was nice now that they had an office right down the road from them, because it wouldn't make her far to go to see which policies that they basically will be following. Okay? It's incredible, absolutely incredible. So again, who are our elected officials representing? Whose interests are they looking out for? You know, $28 trillion to the bankers, not a mortgage paid, no accountability. Think about that. And how is that? How did that get by the American people? Okay, first of all, it really didn't get by the American people, and I want to tell you why, because all the major polls in this country demonstrated that the American people overwhelmingly did not want that bailout given to the bankers. But the Congress was threatened with martial law, and they were threatened, as Representative Sherman said, the Chicken Little theory, where the sky was going to fall down. And if you don't believe that, you can go on the YouTube and Google Representative Sherman speaking of martial law in the United States, and that speech will come up from the congressional floor. Okay, but back to Mr. Rockefeller. So here he is at the Trilateralist Commission in June of 1991, and he's speaking to all his fellow brethren, if you would, okay? And if you want to research this is from The Matrix of Power, How the World Has Been Controlled by Powerful Men Without Your Knowledge. That book was written in the year 2000 by a fine gentleman by the name of Jordan Maxwell, and that's on page 15 and 16. But if you ever want to research the behind-the-scene powers, folks, this is a great researcher, and he presents it all to you. I'm sure if you Google Jordan Maxwell, he will come up on your computer. Okay, so at this Trilateralist Commission meeting in June of '91, this is Mr. Rockefeller speaking, and I quote to you, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." What a statement. Incredible, incredible statement. Of course, this wasn't supposed to be to you folks. So first of all, let's look at the players here. You got the Rockefeller, Mr. Rockefeller giving, kudos and thanks to these organizations, but look at the top papers we're talking about, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine. Folks, you can add Newsweek to this, you can add the Wall Street Journal and others, okay? And other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings. So not only are they taking, the backdoor money from these guys, they're actually attending the meetings where these policies are being devised, and they're keeping it secret. Again, they controlled the editors. They control the editors of what information is going to be presented to you. You would think a statement like this would be in every other newspaper besides the Washington Post and so forth, okay, just for marketing. Because now if I'm their competitor and I can prove that they're on the take and that they're not bringing you forthright information, my God, imagine what that's going to do to my advertising revenue and my circulation. But why wasn't it? Ask yourself that. Okay, and how long has this been going on? This is 1991, and he's saying for 40 years. All right? For 40 years. So we're talking quite a ways back here. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world. Develop their plan for the world. That's you. That's me. That's the future. And this plan is multifaceted, and it affects every facet of your life on a daily basis. And I can assure you, folks, it's not for the betterment of your life, nor your children's life. So they've got this plan for the world, and it would have been impossible for us to develop it if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during these years. But the world is much more sophisticated now. Sophisticated is a nice, fancy, political correct word for indoctrinated. You are more indoctrinated. You are more conditioned now to accept their world government. As it says right here, and prepared and to march forward towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite. Supranational. Above nations. Supra, above. Right? Any medical person knows this. Supra is above. Okay? It's superior. It's where the word superior comes from. All right? So a supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite. Folks, that's them answering to nobody. They're above the nation state. They're above your elected officials that supposedly are looking out for your interest. Intellectual elite and world bankers. Who's gaining all the money right now? Now with this financial reform bill, I haven't had the opportunity to study all of it yet, but the synopsis that I have read so far, I won't use the word shocking and disgusting. Because just like they did in the 20s and the 30s, they created the crisis, and now all the authority and power is given to them. It's amazing. Why is this not in the front page of every newspaper in the country? But anyway, this supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination. That means self-determination of the nation, us, practiced in past centuries. Think about them words, folks. You've got to understand that people who have been telling you for years that all these different things are going on and they've been presented, and you think of them as wackos because their information is so abstract and strange to you, The reason being is because all your information that you've been gathering on for decades, and probably for your lifetime, is being controlled by these very same entities that are giving thanks to the people that have been providing you your information. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So the next time you're wondering why all the mainstream media is the same on a daily basis, 24/7, 365, it's because of these entities right here that we're speaking of, and demonstrating to you and recognizing the congressional floor how it was consolidated together and how it is organized. Really incredible. So I said I didn't want to go too far with regards to getting into the whole mechanics of it, but I did say to you I wanted to get into a little bit about some quotes from people who were involved in the mechanics of it. Okay? Now, folks, these statements, or particularly these two statements, are going to demonstrate to you that the people who are doing this and bringing this forward to you every day and presenting this propaganda, this controlled media information, are doing this willingly. Now, this one gentleman here, named Mr. Swinton, former editor, of the New York Times, he gave an interesting quote in 1953 at the New York Press Club. And ironically, it says here, toasting his profession before the New York Press Club in 1953, John Swinton of the New York Times confessed. Now, this man was the editor of the New York Times when his career was active, okay? And I don't know if the man had been drinking a little bit, but he opens up enough to be honest in front of his comrades, in front of his people, fellow co-workers and competitors in the media industry. And here's what he had to say. Again, this is Mr. John Swinton, New York Times, at the New York Press Club in 1953. If I'd allowed my honest opinions to appear in one issue of my paper before 24 hours, my occupation would have been gone. The business of journalism is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to flaunt at the feet of mammon, to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it, and I know it. And what folly is this, toasting to an independent press? Our talents, our possibilities, our lives are all the property of other men. We are merely intellectual prostitutes. Now, this guy was the former editor of the New York Times. Do you think he has some understanding of the mechanisms, the controllers of information in this country? And this is 1953, folks, and this is after he's retired, and I can assure you he wouldn't, and probably towards the end of his life, because I can assure you he wouldn't have made this statement if he was still actively employed by the New York Times. And who's he talking to? He's talking to all his comrades and competitors in his industry. He's talking to the people who control the print industry in the United States. And let's break it down. If I allowed my honest opinions, I think that verbatim says it right there. So in other words, none of his honest opinions or thoughts are going into what he's been presenting to you as information for his entire career. If they ever appeared in one issue, one single issue of my paper, before 24 hours, my occupation would be gone. In other words, folks, if he had put his honest opinions in one issue of his newspaper during his entire career, within 24 hours, he'd no longer have a job. The business the business of journalism is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to flaunt at the feet of mammon. Think of them words. And to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. I mean, this man is being truthful, but this truth may hurt. You know, I don't know how these people can look at themselves. This is probably what drove this guy to make this statement, was the fact that for all his career during his life before, you know, when he was shaving and looking at himself in the mirror in the morning, it was probably driving him nuts. It was a heavy burden he carried on his shoulders, obviously, because of his statements here. He's coming clean. And he goes on, you know it and I know it. He's talking to the fellow employees, co-workers, and competitors of the industry that you get your information about. And what folly this is, toasting to an independent press. In other words, it's not independent. It's bought and paid for by corporate entities represented by world bankers, and the entities happen to be from the interest of J.P. Morgan and Rockefellers. Since 1924. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We, again, speaking to the people that you get your information from, are merely intellectual prostitutes. Really incredible statement. Really, really incredible. The more I have done research on the media in this country, folks, and I don't, you know, and I'll go even further. There was a gentleman by the name of Robert McChesney, and what he was he was known as the guru, if you would, of being a media instructor. You know, this guy would groom the stage. This guy would do all the prop work and the prep work and for the presentation. Okay, and he was really the one who took the media into, if you would, the limelight of persuasion. All right, but you got to understand. I mean, this guy worked for Time Warner, Disney, all of Robert Murdoch's news corporations: Viacom, Sony, Seagram, AT&T, Liberty Media, Bertelsmann, GE. I mean, it just goes on and goes on and goes on. This guy was the guru of propaganda. All right. And he really was hired to teach some of the editors of Pravda, which is the national newspaper, if you would, of Russia. And basically, they were amazed how the supposed independent media controlled all the information, controlled all the information that was being presented out to the American people, and still kept this facade of being true and independent. Okay? So, and so here's a quote from Mr. Chesney. He's in a conversation with a gentleman named John Pilger. And Mr. Pilger offers his Soviet insight into American journalism. So this conversation, folks, read with me, is going on back and forth, and he says, how do you do it? Now, how do you do it is he's asking Mr. McChesney, you know, how do you do what I just said? How do you control all the information to the people that's being presented to him? You diversify it enough through the left and right paradigm, enough to think they're getting separate information, but yet you're taking them down the same road. Ask the editor of Pravda, touring the U.S. with other Soviet journalists at the height of the Cold War. Having read all the newspapers and watched all the TV, they were astonished to find that all U.S. newspapers and opinions were the same. Folks, this is their quote. This is an interview with John Pilger. All right? They're amazed by this. Wow, how are you guys pulling the wool over these people to such a degree? We're fascinated by this. How are you doing this? In our country, we put people in prison. We tear out their fingernails to achieve this result. What is your secret? Think of that. You know, see, folks, they've learned to do it without the barrel of the gun anymore, through the Hegelian dialectic, like we told you about. Problem, reaction, solution. Create the crisis, get the reaction from the people. You give them the solution always expands their authority and is detrimental to our liberties. But the Soviets at this time, what were they doing to achieve this same result? In our country, we put people in prison. We tear out their fingernails to achieve this result. What's your secret? How are you doing this? We're amazed by your success of pulling the wool over the American people. This is awesome. Teach us. It's really incredible when you understand where our news comes from. And Mr. McChesney gives him a word of caution. He says, basically, the answer is the government and corporate press releases, because reporters merely become redundant to our needs. The shift of power to the PR industry and its corporate clients, which are ever eager to provide news fair to the media. It is bad business to do hard investigative work on corporations and powerful government agencies in this nation that primarily serve the elite interest. There's your answer. He's answering them sort of around the bush, but he's answering them by telling them to sit at the table of the feast and not investigate it. Play along with the game. Let's bring it back. The answer is government and corporate press releases. As more reporters, they are just merely redundant. This shifts the power to the PR industry, public relations industries, and its corporate clients. Okay? That is an amazing statement, in which they are eager to provide news fair to the media. But now he gives them a cravat, if you would, a warning. It is bad business to do hard investigative work on corporations and powerful government agencies that primarily serve elite interest. Who do you think some of them interests may be? What about Federal Reserve private bank that issues your medium of exchange that you call it a dollar, which is merely an instrument of debt and legal tender and not money, as we have demonstrated on this show from the Coinage Acts and Black's Law Dictionary? What about the corporate interest of the bankers that just got $28 trillion without a mortgage paid and not a bit of transparency as to where the money went? When Mr. Bernanke bluntly told Representative Sanders from Vermont, when Mr. Sanders asked him, "Are you going to tell the American people where the money went?" And he plainly looked at the camera and said, "No. No. Not no, I'm not," or "No, I don't have recollection," or "I'll get back to you on that, Senator." He just said no. Why do you think the interest of where the $28 trillion went wasn't covered by the mainstream media? Why do you think the interest of who created the bubbles, if you would, was not covered? Do you, folks, you gave out $28 trillion to corporations that you really don't understand what the problem was, who created the problem, how the problem grew in depth, what safeguards were not taken to nip the problem in the bud? You don't understand any of that. And the reason why you don't is because you get your information from the very same mainstream media that these very same interests control all the way back in 1924. Imagine where they are today. So when you hear about cyber wars and we have to tighten up the internet, the reason why they want to tighten up the internet, folks, is because this kind of information is getting out to the broad world. It's going viral, as they say. That's why they want to control the internet. So when you see these articles in the newspaper about, potential cyber attacks, just like when you see these articles about global warming and the rest of the facades they present to you, so they can charge you carbon taxes and regulate what you eat and where you live and how you drive and what you use for fuel and how many tons of carbon you produce and how much you pay for the right to do that. Because we have to pay Al Gore and the Rothschilds to save the world. Sorry, I'm being a little cynical there, but sometimes I can't help it. Folks, these are the people who are giving you this information, and you're not looking out who are they serving, whose interests are they serving. All right? You've got a quote from the former editor of the New York Times. You've got a quote from Mr. Rockefeller, and you know what? I think I want to read that one more time because it's so astounding. You know, and this is in secrecy, not meant to go out to the general public. We are grateful to the Washington Post and New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during these years. But the world is much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. What an amazing statement. Absolutely incredible. This should have you questioning when you're watching whoever, CNN, Fox, or any of the other ones. You know, you should be asking yourselves, why are they presenting this to me? Okay, why are they not telling me this, but why are they presenting this to me? Which road are they trying to take me down? Oh, I may be in the right lane, I may be in the left lane, but I'm traveling down the same road to a world government that is not going to answer, is not answering now to your elected representatives, but yet dictating policy to you. And folks, if I haven't done a complete study on the Obamacare health bill, what I am able to get of it, but I will tell you there are some things coming down the pike with that bill besides the heavy taxation, besides all the extra IRS agents, besides all the policing of the medical industry and so forth. I'm telling you, they're going to bring it right down to how many calories, how much sodium you take in, what you eat, when you eat, and how much you can. And don't think I'm lying to you, I'm not. In the future, we are going to do a study on this bill, and I think you're going to be absolutely amazed at the language in this bill and what it does. Now, I am not allowed to promote any entity on this show, and I respect that, and I will follow that. But I am going to read from you, and I just picked two from my house, folks. I didn't study these and say, okay, I just picked up two newspapers, and I'm going to read just some articles. I don't know how much time we have left. I'm thinking somewhere in the area of 15 minutes or so. So I am just going to read a brief summary of some of these articles, and you tell me if you're hearing any of this on the media, the mainstream media, okay? Here we go. 17 states follow Arizona's lead on immigration. Now, you haven't read this, folks. All you've read about the Arizona legislation is that everyone's against it. It's racist. It's unconstitutional, okay? What you haven't read is that 17 states, these being border states, have taken Arizona's lead and are drafting up their own legislation to protect their borders because the federal government's not doing it. And it has broad support from its constituents. You haven't read that, have you? No. You haven't read about the violence that's going on the border. You haven't read about the 80 miles in some areas of the country where they are not allowing American citizens to go there because it's become a safe zone, if you would, for immigrants. You haven't read about Ranch Rescue, where people are, it's an organization where people are literally tried to get together years ago because ranchers were being murdered in their own homes. You haven't read about how the police, they don't even arrest people, illegal immigrants for drunk driving and so forth because there's no money in them. It costs revenue for the corporation to process them, so they go after the people who can provide revenue to the corporation. That's you and me. You're not reading about that stuff. You're not reading about the violence and the murders. Okay? You're not reading about the sheriff's departments telling the people to buy guns because we cannot protect you. No. You're not reading about the 60% population of California in their prison systems that is all illegal immigrants costing hundreds of millions of dollars every year for the residents of California. You're not hearing about that. You're hearing it's racist, it's unconstitutional, it's going to divide the country. No, you know why, folks? Because when you look at the North American Union, they want to eliminate the Mexican border. They want to eliminate the Canadian border. They want us all serving one currency called the Amero. We've talked about it before on this show. Go on the internet, look up the Amero. You'll find out that we're actually paying foreign debts with it because nobody wants our bills. Nobody wants our note anymore that you know is $1. It's not worth anything. It's collapsing through the floor internationally. All right? So you haven't heard about this. Let me see, what else haven't you heard about? Massive pools of stagnant mystery money could be answered for cash-strapped states. Wow. What are they talking about? They're talking about something that you haven't not heard about, probably ever on the mainstream media, and they're called CAF reports. Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, because here's how it works, folks. The government, every municipality, every agency of the government keeps two separate books. They have a budget that they present to you. And the budget is the tax revenue taken in and all the bills going out, and of course there's always a shortfall because we need more money. And then there's a thing called the CAF report, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. I want you to look that up on the internet. Punch in CAFR report, all right, CAF report, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Folks, that's the books you don't get to see. That's the books they don't tell you about. That's all the assets. That's the stock holdings. That's the properties. That's the reserves of currency. That's all the assets they have that's not presented to the people. You present it with the budget. So as the mainstream media told you about this, folks, this has been going on since the 40s. These CAF reports. If you look up Walter Burren, obviously he was the head guy back in the 90s who discovered these things. If you go to his website, I think you'll find some incredible information on it. But literally, folks, it's billions and billions of dollars tied up that the American people don't even know about, that they purchased with their labors through tax revenue. Okay? I mean, this is just 2 articles. There's 6 here. I won't get into them. Bilderberg, global cabal pushes for agenda before the meeting in Spain. Folks, they just met in Spain, I don't know, about 5-6 weeks ago. And now we find out what we're going to be doing in the next year, where they're going to be taking us. Okay? Bilderberg pushing agenda in advance of conference in Spain. It just goes on and goes on. Then it gets into some history here about bin Laden that I guarantee you won't be reading in the mainstream media. All right? Then we have an advertisement here for a solar generator. Self-sufficiency. Okay? Some things you may not know, and one of the things you'll find out is really interesting is that, believe it or not, folks, electrical usage, between 30 and 35% of it is what they call dormant usage. In other words, your TV is still plugged in at night and no one's watching it. It's using juice, your computer, your alarm clock, whatever it may be. Think if you could save that 35% of your electric bill, how much that would help you. All right? Let me see what else we got here. Oh, Fannie Mae begs for billions more. Yeah, Fannie Mae. The taxpayer bailout home mortgage company recently requested another $8.4 billion in addition to the $145 billion it has already received. And then it gets into the breakdown of the plan. What's the little bit of the history. Oh, and it also gets into basically, about some of their money that they've paid out in bonuses. How come you haven't heard that? Banks collapsing at a faster pace than in 2009. Wow. Because 2009, we had more banks collapse since 1931. What happened in 1933? Everything collapsed. So now we're ahead of the pace of the previously worst year that we've had since 1931 in bank collapsing. Folks, these banks are collapsing. What happened to the $28 trillion? Weren't they too big to fail? If they failed, everything would collapse. We need this money to shore the foundation of our economic system. All that money, most of it went overseas, folks, and most of it went out into bonuses. They purchased positive assets with that money. They did not protect the small banks. All right? Are you reading this in the mainstream media today? Absolutely not. Okay? And then they break down the what's called the leverage ratios and total assets of the top 10 banks that have failed last year. Unbelievable. So we got the bank failures, and then we've got Fannie Mae begging for more money from you. Okay? Here we go. Senate passes Wall Street reform. And this is from Senator Maria Cantwell. And you probably never even heard of her. And you want to know why? Because she's representing your interests, or trying to. She's trying to get behind the maze of the controllers and present information to you from the floor. She talks about the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, H.R. 4173, which got in by a vote of 59 to 39. And then she breaks down incredible the lobbyists on the Wall Street's payroll. She gets into the organizations. She gets into some of the people behind it. She even gets into some particular people in the Congress that voted and supported this bill and was pushing everybody to vote for it. And some of the interests behind them. How come you're not reading that in the mainstream media? How about this one? What they're going to do to Social Security. Yeah, they're going to chop Social Security, folks. They're going to raise the rate up to 70 before you can collect. And remember what they did last year? True inflation in this country was 6.1%. What'd they do to all the Social Security recipients? They told them there was no inflation because they changed the way they calculated inflation through the Consumer Price Index to make it zero, so they wouldn't have to pay you a CAF, a COLA, cost of living allowance, because it's all geared to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So, all right. So what do they do? I'm CPI. I'm sorry, my medical field come back. The CPI. Okay. So they changed the way they formulate the CPI, which is based on what you receive to get your money back that they've been paying into all your life. Amazing. Is this article in the mainstream? No. No, it's not. Okay? Oh, and then they got the whole list. Who voted in reign of the Wall Street Greedmeisters? They got the whole list of everybody who voted for this bill. All right? Incredible. How come that's not in the mainstream media? What else we got here? Oh, a whole 2-page article on the CAF reports. Amazing. And the woman's name, she's an author, named Ellen Brown, and she's talking about her book, The Web of Debt, which breaks down everything about these CAF reports. Incredible. Okay? And she also gets into, folks, the Bank of North Dakota in Bismarck, North Dakota is the only state-run bank in this country. And guess what? It's running a budget surplus and remains #1 in job growth. And then she gets into some of the statistics here. Think of that. State controlling their own money system, their own bank. Amazing. You don't hear any of that in the mainstream media, do you? Okay? And of course, then they get into some of the books that are out there with regards to support the knowledge they want that it should be presented to you. You know, a lot of us have heard about Jesse Venture's new book, American Conspiracies, which I've read, which is fantastic. Judge Napolitano, you probably know him from Fox News. The Lies the Government Tells You, Myth, Power, and Deception in American History. Even though this guy's on Fox News, are you hearing about this book? No. Okay? You know, and then of course they're talking about a Liberty Conference which took place in Montana, which was incredibly successful. Thousands and thousands of people show up. Not a word about it in the mainstream media. And then of course they have some editorials with regards to, the meaning of free speech in America, where we are right now. Okay? And it's really incredible. And now who put this paper together? Is this a bunch of wackos? No. No, let me tell you some positions these people formerly held. Former editor, assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal. Former editor of it's a paper in Columbus, Ohio. I forget the name of it, my apologies. Former economic advisor and creator of Reaganomics during the Reagan administration. Former Secretary of the Treasury. These are all people like Mr. Swinton that we wrote to you, who had a hard time looking at himself in the mirror every day, and finally at his retirement gala spilled the beans about what's been bothering him all his life, calling himself and all his compadres intellectual whores that are selling their country, that all their property is property of other men, that he didn't have one issue of his newspaper with his honest opinion in it, and he understood if he did, he wouldn't have a job within 24 hours. Quite a contrast from independent people who were really trying to bring you information and still, from their positions that they had, still have the intelligence, still have the resources to gather information that's not being presented to you, as compared to the people who were serving the people, the entities that just got $28 trillion and then some, without any accountability to you or the representatives that are elected, that you feel you will elect to represent you. So folks, this is how the mainstream media is controlled 24/7, 365 in this country. These are the players that are doing that. These are the players. There are players out there, folks. If you are interested at some point of finding out media resources, you can go on the internet and it won't take you much time at all to find them. Punch in alternative media. I think you'll be very, very impressed with The growing movement. Folks, the print in this country is losing money. Remember we talked about their revenues through advertising and all that? They're all losing money because the circulation is dying. People are starting to wake up to their facade, okay? The other end of that is the alternative media is growing in leaps and bounds, and even in print, it's growing. So you have to ask yourself, who's telling me the truth? Who's looking out for my benefit? And what road are they taking me down? And then, of course, you have to ask yourself, if I don't like the information I'm being fed, and I feel I don't have all the information to go through the process of reasoning process of coming to a conclusion, then you have to look at yourself and ask yourself, do I need to make a change in where I am getting my information? Is it pertinent to me and my family that I have the information above and beyond what the puppet masters want me to digest? And if you come to the conclusion that it is a benefit to you, I tell you, it is your duty as a safeguard of your nation, of that family, of that community, to have all the information available to you to come to the conclusions that you need to address the issues of your life, of your nation, and of your community. It's very simple. Folks, with that being said, we thank you very much for watching. We know you're very busy. We really appreciate that you take the time to watch us. But as we always end, we remind you that your government is your responsibility. We thank you.